Welcome to Max Tech, and this is our review of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. When it comes to this latest iPhone update, I've been hearing a lot of people refer to it as the 12S, with the main reason being that nothing has really changed. And yes, on the surface, it doesn't really seem that much different since it's got the same flat-sided design, the same camera layout, albeit larger this year, the same notch, which is a bit smaller, and not that many new major feature changes. But I'd say that the true value of the 13 Pro Max is hidden beneath the surface, with changes that seem subtle at first, but are hugely important if they were ever taken away. So what I'm gonna do in this 1 week review is focus on the features that are actually gonna matter in terms of improving your everyday life if you choose to upgrade to this phone. And then I'm also gonna talk about my wife's experience since she also got an update to the 13 Pro and she isn't a techie, which will make her perspective interesting to hear. But before I get into all of that, I wanna refer back to the extremely important features of the iPhone 12 Pro Max that I've been using for the past year and talk about what actually changed my life, because if you think about it, that is the reason why people upgrade their iPhones. They want to feel that difference every day. Now, believe it or not, out of everything new with the iPhone 12 Pro, the MagSafe magnetic charging feature changed my everyday life the most since I don't like using a case, and the built-in magnets allow me to mount my phone either at my office or even better, in my car, so I can use it with just one hand while reading notifications and everything else, all while charging the battery at the same time. This alone is by far the best thing to ever happen to my iPhone experience, and at first it seemed like a very subtle or minor update. Now, while it wasn't that big of a deal, the new flat-sided design was still important because it made my daily experience feel fresh, and those boxy sides also improved my grip on the phone more than ever before. Going further, the iPhone 12 Pro came with an extra 2 GB of RAM compared to my 11 Pro, and this was a game changer because all of my issues with apps closing down went away instantly, making my iPhone feel even more reliable. And finally, the last major life changer was the addition of the 5G modem, but it wasn't necessarily for 5G itself because regular LTE speeds became a lot faster and more reliable, so all of those issues I used to have with bad service and YouTube videos pausing and buffering disappeared. So if you didn't already upgrade to the 12 Pro, you need to realize that those awesome features that impacted my life the most are also going to be coming to the 13 Pro, and they'll likely be important to many of you as well. But now that you understand what I mean by subtle yet very important features, it's time to dive deep into the new features of the 13 Pro Max that are already starting to change my everyday life. First up, the built-in speakers are incredibly important to me because I like to turn on YouTube videos while I'm getting ready and showering in the morning, as well as random times throughout the day when I'm not using my AirPods. And this year, there is a massive improvement in terms of both the speaker quality and the volume compared to the 12 Pro Max, finally matching or even beating out the best speakers you can get on a Samsung flagship phone like the S21 Ultra. Just hear it for yourself. So this change alone is a nice little quality of life improvement, and even my wife instantly noticed the difference with her new 13 Pro, which means that this is important for everyone, not just tech heads. Another difference I really love about the 13 Pro Max is the ability to manually adjust the display brightness even brighter than on the 12 Pro Max, now up to 1000 nits instead of 800. And this is huge for me because I personally don't like using auto brightness, and I love that extra boost of brightness when I'm from outside and it's hard to see the display. And of course, while the new notch isn't that much smaller, it still does feel a bit more fresh and new compared to older iPhones, so I guess it's a nice little touch. Now, the most controversial new feature is definitely 120Hz ProMotion because of the unique way that Apple is pulling it off, causing people to call it fake 120Hz, which is obviously the wrong take. And even though it is real, many people are saying that it's not really that noticeable. For example, Joshua Chang did an experiment with a few of his friends to see if they would notice ProMotion on the new iPhone, and out of 5 people, only 1 of them noticed a difference without receiving any hints from Joshua. Now, I personally also ran the same experiment on my wife with her new 13 Pro, and she honestly didn't notice anything until I turned on low power mode, which by the way limits the frame rate back down to 60 Hz to save battery life, and then only at that point she noticed the difference in smoothness. So just like my wife, Joshua's friends were easily able to tell the difference when they finally compared 120Hz ProMotion to their old 60 Hz iPhones.
If I'm reading, it's gonna help a lot, especially like in the dark or if I'm not zooming things in. Now I notice it's kind of it's not smooth on my current phone.
And that right there is the point that I'm trying to make with ProMotion. It's something that's very subtle and hard to notice at first, especially after you get used to it, but if your 13 Pro ever got taken away and you had to go back to your older iPhone, even the 12 Pro, it feels noticeably worse with very choppy animations and scrolling. And this is the exact same thing that I experienced when comparing the iPad Pro, which has had ProMotion since 2017, to every other 60Hz iPad. The rest just feels slow and choppy compared to the Pro. So here's a fair warning before we move on. If you're gonna be upgrading to the iPhone 13 Pro with 120Hz, your iPad experience on every non-Pro 60Hz iPad is gonna go way down, and you're gonna be tempted to buy an iPad Pro, and I think that point alone speaks for itself. Now, in terms of how 120Hz ProMotion actually works on the iPhone, I honestly think that Apple's 120Hz is better than the competition, which has had 120Hz for years already. Just like the other phones out there like Samsung's Galaxy S21 Ultra, Apple's ProMotion tech allows the display's refresh rate to dynamically and automatically adjust between 10Hz and 120Hz depending on what you're doing. So if you're playing a game at 60 FPS, the display refreshes at 60Hz to match it. Or if you're watching a 24 FPS movie, the refresh rate comes down to 24 Hz to help save a ton of battery life. But if you're swiping through your home screen or scrolling through web pages, it can go up to 120 Hz. But Apple is doing something completely unique and innovative. It matches the speed of your scrolling or swiping to the refresh rate. So if you're scrolling at a regular pace while reading a page, it could only be refreshing at 70 Hz instead of the full 120 Hz. And that is the reason why people are calling it fake. But Apple's logic is that when you're scrolling slowly, your eyes will only be able to notice a certain amount of refresh rate. So why waste battery life by refreshing at the full 120 Hz? But then if you scroll super fast, the refresh rate can actually go up and hit 120 Hz because the text is moving so fast that 120 Hz can actually be noticeable. And of course, when you're playing games with 120 FPS support, the display will be able to refresh at a solid 120 FPS with no issues. And then even better, when everything slows down to a crawl, like let's say when you look at a photo or you're reading a static article, the refresh rate goes down to only 10 Hz in real time, on the fly, within milliseconds, helping save a ton of battery life. This is absolutely genius, and it's the #1 reason why the battery life on the 13 Pro Max is the best out of any phone ever made, and I'll get to that in just a second. Now, technically, Samsung's S21 Ultra's display is advertised as being able to go down to 10 Hz, but I've been doing a lot of research, and apparently S21 Ultra users have only ever seen the refresh rate go down to as low as 48 Hz while watching 24 Hz videos on YouTube. But in most apps and situations like reading static articles, it's still stuck at 60 Hz, draining 6 times more battery life than the iPhone 13 Pro. And apparently, the S21 Ultra only gets below 48 Hz when showing the always-on display at 10 Hz. So I'm gonna go ahead and confirm that Apple's 120 Hz is miles ahead of Samsung's 120Hz. Now moving on to battery life, this is one of the changes that has already impacted my life, since throughout this week, I've been constantly surprised whenever I looked at my battery percentage, expecting it to need a charge pretty soon, but it just holds up so well. This year's 13 Pro Max has an 18% larger battery than last year, and it definitely shows because multiple YouTubers have noticed drastic battery life differences, like Mr. Who's the Boss, who registered almost 10 hours of battery life, which is over an hour more than the best he's ever seen in a smartphone. And your average consumer mentioned that he got 8 hours and 14 minutes of screen on time, which is something he's never achieved with any other smartphone ever. So I would say out of any feature you can have on a smartphone, the battery life is one of the most important ones because it allows you to use the rest of the other features for longer, and the 13 Pro Max is the best in the world for that. And one little interesting tidbit I want to add is that the 13 Pro Max can now charge faster at a peak of 27 watts. So I went ahead and ordered this small and compact Anker 30-watt GAN power brick on Amazon to make sure I'm getting the fastest charging speed possible, and I'll put that link down in the description below. Now moving on to a bit of my wife's experience with her regular iPhone 13 Pro model, she mentioned that she noticed a big jump in battery life when she went to plug in her phone before bed at 1 a.m. and she was shocked to see that it was still at 50% battery after a full day. She also noticed that the new lower button layout is much more convenient to press, especially for the power button since she has smaller hands. She also really likes multiple aspects about the new design, like the new relocated earpiece speaker, which is now actually quite a bit louder and more convenient for phone calls. And she especially likes the much larger camera bump since it looks quite more powerful and professional. And you only need one look at iFixit's teardown of the 13 Pro to realize why the camera bump is so large compared to last year's 12 Pro. And I myself absolutely love the huge camera bump because I fully believe it's one of the most important parts of a modern smartphone's design, and Apple pulled it off perfectly since the camera bump uses a 3-step design with a foundational bump with the edged glass, going into 3 premium metal rings, and then finally another bump on the lenses themselves, which honestly makes it seem much more subtle compared to Samsung's massive brick of a bump that's so big that you can literally hang the phone on one finger. But before I digress any further, my wife says her MagSafe wallet seems to hold on better because the larger camera bump is so close to it, so it's harder to move the wallet out of place. Now with that said, she also noticed a huge amount of camera differences, which I'm gonna save for the camera section of this review, but first, I want to get into one of the biggest improvements I've noticed with the 13 Pro Max, and that is the new A15 Bionic chip. Now, while some people have said that it's a pretty disappointing upgrade compared to the A14, if you compare the CPU benchmarks in Geekbench 5, there are actually some major differences if you really dig in, so let's do just that. First off, the 13 Pro comes with the 5-core GPU version of the A15, which leads to a pretty huge jump in graphics performance, which becomes even more impressive if you compare it to the 7-core M1 GPU in the MacBook Air. But the real game changer is the efficiency aspect of the new chip, since it's built on TSMC's 5nm plus process node. Both mine and Max's iPhone 12 Pro Max suffered from overheating issues, which led to annoying display dimming while doing things like wirelessly charging, or even while using basically any intensive app or game outside in the sun, especially with 5G enabled. But now, with the 13 Pro Max, wireless charging doesn't heat it up nearly as much, so maybe there are new redesigned charging coils for heat management that were rumored but never confirmed by Apple. On top of that, using cellular or 5G doesn't heat it up that much anymore, most likely due to the Snapdragon X60M modem, which is built on a more efficient 5nm process node. And playing many common games no longer makes the display dim down like crazy, apart from a couple of very intensive games like Genshin Impact and Pascal's Wager, which now supports 120 FPS on the 13 Pro, and it heats up like crazy while at maxed out settings. But in reality, using a ton of GPU power is the only case where we've noticed any display dimming at all on the 13 Pro Max, and it's so much better than before, like we showed you guys in an Antutu stress test benchmark where the 13 Pro Max dimmed down to around 80% brightness, while the 12 Pro Max went all the way down to 40%, which is obviously a huge difference. So overall, not having the display dim in common everyday situations like before has been a game changer in everyday life. Now, I actually did a bunch of research on the A15 chip, and I discovered an in-depth wattage test done by GeekerOne on YouTube, who discovered that Apple's 5-core GPU in the A15 was 35% faster in the GFX Bench Aztec Ruins benchmark while using slightly less wattage, 7.91 watts instead of 7.97. And then I found a Genshin Impact gaming test done by DameTech on YouTube, and he showed that the 13 Pro Max scored a higher average of 59.2 FPS compared to 58.7 on the 12 Pro Max, while actually being 0.6 degrees Celsius cooler due to only using an average of 76.7 GPU usage compared to around 90% on the 12 Pro Max, which shows that the new one has more power to spare. But the really awesome new discovery that GeekerOne found is that if you turn on low power mode, the power usage drops down from 7.91 to a very low 3 watts, while being barely any slower than the A14 at max power usage, and actually being 17% faster than the Snapdragon 888 while using 3 times less wattage. So I ended up trying out a few games like Call of Duty Mobile and League of Legends Wild Rift while using low power mode, and I honestly forgot that it was enabled because I was getting perfect 60 FPS the entire time without any display dimming at all. And part of this awesome change is because, according to DisplayMate, the display on the 13 Pro Max has 25% higher power efficiency than the one on the 12 Pro Max, so the display no longer adds nearly as much heat as it did before, leading to much less dimming. But the real stress test was Genshin Impact under low power mode, which is the ultimate display dimming game. But I noticed that for the first 15 or so minutes, the display didn't dim below 80% brightness, which is awesome. And then only at close to 20 minutes did it fall to around 50% brightness before actually recovering back up to around 80% a few minutes after that. This is a massive improvement compared to not using low power mode, where the display would dim to 40 to 50% after only 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay. So basically the conclusion is that everybody should be using low power mode when playing 60 FPS games on the 13 Pro because it ends up undervolting the A15 chip, which saves battery life and keeps it from overheating as fast while not sacrificing much performance at all. So now, with the A15 chip heat management improvements out of the way, let's finally get into the camera upgrades, and this year, they are huge. According to my wife, she loves the new macro mode that lets her get super close to subjects, and she also noticed that there is less flaring from the sun in many photo situations, which is actually something that both Max and I confirmed in our own camera testing. Like this shot I took of the sunrise with absolutely zero flaring at all. My wife also noticed more detail with the ultra-wide lens, which she used to avoid because it would be too noisy. And she also loves the really natural colors on portrait photos, especially with the 3x lens that makes it look more like professional portraits. She also said night mode photos turn out much better with the 13 Pro, and even though I personally don't care about the new photographic styles feature, my wife loves it because she used to always have to edit her photos and make them more bright and cool toned before posting them on social media. But now she can customize the preset and forget it. And finally, she really enjoyed the cinematic video mode because it's fun to play with, making her feel like she has a professional camera on her all the time. So with that said, let me get into my experience with the new camera updates, starting with cinematic mode. Now I know it's not perfect, but if you turn down the blur and make it more subtle, it actually looks really nice and natural. And if you think about it, when Apple introduced portrait photo mode with the iPhone 7 Plus way back in 2016, it definitely had its flaws. But now, 5 years later, Apple's iPhone 13 Pro takes by far the best portrait photos out of any smartphone in the world with the new 3x telephoto lens and the most accurate background blur that actually takes the depth range into account, as well as giving you the most natural colors and glow from sunsets and very natural looking bokeh balls, even through the cracks of trees and things like that. And the ability to combine night mode and portrait mode thanks to the LiDAR scanner makes nighttime portraits absolutely destroy other phones like Samsung's Galaxy S21 Ultra. So when it comes to the brand new cinematic mode, I feel like this is one of the features that Apple is introducing right now, but will refine over the next 5 years and turn it into an excellent option for hobby videographers. And even right now, it's already an awesome solution for beginner YouTube creators who don't have the cash to spend on an expensive camera. Just look at this great looking example that Talos of Tech recently showed us, which actually looks quite decent. But moving on to the rest of the cameras, we're getting improvements across the board in terms of the sensors, with even the regular wide camera giving us better detail, highlights, and dynamic range, especially for shots of the sun, as well as an awesome improvement for nighttime photos. The 3x telephoto lens is also very impressive compared to previous generations, giving it an awesome amount of background compression and finally making 10x digital zoom shots somewhat usable. However, don't try and use it at night because the 3x optical lens also comes with a slower f2.8 aperture, which takes in much less light, causing low light detail to get worse than it was before. But thankfully, you can now use night mode with the telephoto lens to make things look a lot better. Now, just like my wife mentioned, the ultra-wide camera is much better this year since the faster aperture lets in more light, so it does a much better job in lower light scenarios, and it's still by far my favorite camera to use for 4K video recording in the daytime since it's just so sharp and detailed. Now, while the front-facing selfie camera hasn't changed hardware-wise, Apple's new software updates like Smart HDR4 make a huge difference for high dynamic range images, like not blowing out bright sky in the background. And it also seems like they've drastically reduced sun flares, even in front-facing video. So when Apple went on stage and said this is the biggest improvement in iPhone camera performance ever, I'm actually starting to believe them. And if you think I'm kidding, watch the full iPhone 11 vs 12 vs 13 Pro Max camera comparison that Max made, because the updates are very impressive. In fact, the iPhone 13 Pro Max absolutely destroyed the S21 Ultra in our unbiased blind camera comparison, which was very surprising because it was the exact opposite with last year's 12 Pro Max, which got killed by the S21U. And this year, one of the biggest differences I noticed was just how well the new iPhone handles glowing signs at night, giving you excellent color reproduction while maintaining the natural gradient, making it look basically just like it does in real life. So with all of that said, I'd honestly say that the drastic camera improvements alone are worthy of the 13 title instead of the 12S like everyone's calling it. But on top of that, you're also getting much better battery life. You get much better speakers, you get the 120Hz ProMotion feature, you get the smaller notch, faster 27-watt peak charging speed, and a brighter display that doesn't suffer from daily dimming issues due to better heat management and efficiency, and the new awesome A15 Bionic chip. And you get it all for the same $1,100 price tag for the Pro Max. And those are just the differences compared to the 12 Pro Max. So I'd say that if you ended up skipping last year's iPhone 12, then upgrading to the iPhone 13 Pro or Pro Max is a no-brainer. But if you already owned one of the iPhone 12s, then I would only upgrade if you're currently not happy with either the battery life, the display refresh rate, display dimming issues, or the camera system on your current iPhone, since those are the main game-changing features this year. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this 1-week review, and if you did, we would really appreciate if you would subscribe by clicking the circle above, because we've got a ton of awesome content planned for both the new iPhones and the new M1X MacBook Pros coming later this year, so definitely check out that camera comparison right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.